Let's talk a little bit about equipment. The equipment you're going to need depends a lot on the project that you're creating. Normally, you're going to want a Raspberry Pi 3 because it's the newest and fastest. Comes with onboard Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and 4 USB ports. If you're building a robot or a drone or something else where space is a concern, then Raspberry Pi Zero is going to be a better choice. Always check what's available before you start a project. As newer versions of the Raspberry Pi come out, older versions sometimes have reduced prices, and maybe it's enough. Maybe it has enough requirements to meet your project needs. This course, I'm going to be using a Raspberry Pi 3, but all the material can be applied to any other version of the Raspberry Pi. Of course, you're going to need a power supply. You should get an approved power supply. In some cases, you can use an old cell phone charger, but you're going to have to make sure that it's a 5-volt charger and has a micro USB plug. Make sure that you check into it and make sure that it's going to work with your Raspberry Pi, or better yet, just get an approved power supply. They're not that expensive. I believe I got mine for around $7 or so. And get that, because then you're not going to have any trouble. There are also powered USB hubs that will give you more functionality as far as having more than 4 USB ports available and can serve as your power supply. In addition to that, again, make sure it's approved for use with the Raspberry Pi and that it is powered. You're going to need a micro SD card. All Raspberry Pis boot from the micro SD card, but you can move the file system to a USB drive, either setting up with Berry Boot if you choose to go that direction, or manually you can move it off after you've set it up using Noobs or another way to install Raspbian. Normally you're going to need at least an 8 gig micro SD card to fit everything on it. If you don't want to use a flash drive later on, you probably need to get more space on your SD card. If you're running just from the SD card, you might want a 32 or 64 gig card. If you go with a thumb drive or USB drive, then you're going to want to get a 32 or 64 or even larger size. I like those low profile flash thumb drives. I get those and move my file system onto there, and I find that's more stable, and it usually works pretty good. You don't need a case, but it's a very good idea just because they're not expensive, and it will protect your Raspberry Pi in case it gets bumped or falls off a desk or something. Depending on what you're working on, if you're putting in a robot, of course, or a drone or something like that, you may not need a case if it's going to be enclosed in some other structure. HDMI cord is going to be needed for initial setup, or if your project needs to be connected to a TV display for whatever reason, say you're building a gaming system or something like that, then you're going to need the HDMI cord and the TV dedicated to your project. Otherwise, the cord is just needed for initial setup. Same for the TV. You're going to need it to be able to step through the initial setup. But if you're going to run headless, which is having it running without a display and just connect to it using SSH, using another computer, then you don't need the HDMI cord or the TV later on. And the same thing with the USB keyboard and mouse. You're going to need it for the initial setup, but running headless, you won't need it. If you do choose to have a dedicated keyboard and mouse, Logitech and some other companies make a nice wireless USB keyboard with a built-in mouse pad that works well with the Raspberry Pi, and you can get one of those and just keep it plugged in all the time. Sometimes you get these components in a kit form. You can save some money if you find a kit that has everything you need, or buy them individually. Also, make sure your SD card is approved. Follow this link to check if it is.